Joining me now is Dan Casey. Coach, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, man, I'm a big fan. I'd like to introduce you if possible, because there's, I think, three things that I think provide context for this conversation. You've been a high school football coach, you're a YouTuber at Coach Dan Casey, and you're a co-host of the Coaches Collective podcast. You've interviewed guys like Pat Fitzgerald, the coach at Northwestern, Mike Kafka, quarterback coach at Kansas City, also former NFL quarterback, Hal Mumme, Jamie Chadwell from Coastal Carolina. And I'm just curious how you got into making content as a coach. It's an interesting transition, but I think you make such interesting, good content.
No, I appreciate that. Well, the Genesis story, every time I talk to people about this, like, I would say the majority of people that know who I am at all is probably from Twitter, honestly. That was kind of how I got my start.
That's how I found you.
Yeah, the reason I started a Twitter account it's kind of funny. Is I got a head high school football coaching job when I was 24 years old. And I played college football. I was a defensive player. And when I transitioned into coaching, I decided to coach on the offensive side of the ball. And what you realize pretty quickly is I spent 18 years of my life playing the game. And when I started coaching, I realized immediately, like, I knew nothing, especially on offense. I could put together a defense, but I knew nothing on offense. And so I was in an interesting situation. I was at a smaller private school, and so I wanted to really dive in and learn a lot, and I didn't have the luxury of going down the hall to a seasoned offensive coordinator and saying, all right, talk me through, this offensive stuff, or I just didn't have a lot of coaches around me in the building. My first year, I had a coach that helped me a lot, and then he ended up moving on to another school, and so I was really just like in the dark. And I was looking for ways to connect with other coaches. And so for me, Twitter was that kind of like connection point. Obviously, being a younger coach and being more familiar with technology and social media, I was looking to connect, but I was also looking, like, one of my kind of life philosophies is the idea of, it's kind of a comedian idea of like writing on stage. So like a lot of comedians will play at smaller venues and kind of like try out their stuff. And if it plays well, like, okay, that'll make the Netflix special, right?
Yeah.
But, you throw away the stuff that doesn't work. And so for me, like, posting plays on Twitter was kind of like me testing out, like, presenting ideas to other coaches and ultimately to my players. And so kind of seeing what I liked, what I didn't like, trying to get people's advice. And early on, I would post stuff and I would be like, this is a really cool power play from, Washington or something. And coaching Twitter would jump all over me and be like, that's a counter. And so you just learn a lot from guys. Like, football coaching Twitter will not let you be wrong for very long. And so, I just decided to have thick skin about it and keep posting stuff every day and trying to learn. And so many generous coaches throughout the years have reached out to me and offered to sit down with me and talk to me. And I've just made so many great connections through, Twitter and Instagram. And, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but like, it's become such a great networking platform for so many coaches, I think.
Yeah, I'm curious, when you post, like, you have that great video. I forget the actual title, but it's like, you should steal Lincoln Riley's, I think, something concept. You find that you're genuinely excited? I mean, it comes across in video like, this is cool, and you want to share with the world. Is that genuine? Like, you just want to share?
Yeah, man. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like, football it's so hard to trace the history of, like, football plays in particular, because everyone's going to claim it. And football's kind of this like oral history tradition where not a lot gets written down because it's happening in real time. And so you might have a coach write a book here and there, but for the most part, like, you just have to go back and watch the games. And I love that. Like, I think I'm a little bit of a football historian at heart as well. Like, I just love diving into old stuff and seeing how it comes back around. And so for me, like, I've always kind of felt like the best coaches aren't coming up with something brand new. They're kind of curating all the best stuff. And Lincoln Riley's obviously a perfect example. And so I'm like, he's not necessarily reinventing football, but he's taking the best of all these different systems and synthesizing it. And that's what makes him really, I think, probably the best play caller in football right now. But for me as a coach, I'm like, shoot, I'm going to steal too. Like, if I like something, it's going in my playbook and trying to figure out what works for me, what works for our team most of all. And that's when football gets fun, is you get to learn from so many different people and see what's working and what's not, and you can kind of take what you want and leave the rest.
It's a weird aside, but did you see the video Brett Coleman made about the history of the spread offense? He's got like the whiteboard. He looks like Charlie Day from yeah. He's got all like this like long string of. I love that kind of stuff. The history.
No, I mean,
yeah.
Brett's awesome. I mean, I think there's such what I love and appreciate so much is like I've learned a ton about football from guys that have never coached a day because there's people that are willing to study the game, and I think. With the kind of, especially during COVID, like there was this movement of football to a lot of things were moving online. And so you just saw like different voices pop up that were really just had some poignant insights and really drew out some like really great stuff. And so I don't know, I think it like leveled the playing field a lot. I think football for the longest time was so hierarchical where it was like, okay, you get in as a GA and you climb the ladder and you have to kind of sit under these people for years and years and years, and then you maybe get your shot. And I think, in some ways, the digital revolution in football is kind of leveling the playing field and saying, man, there's a lot of really smart coaches that are coaching at tiny little schools in rural America, and they study the game like crazy, and they honestly could probably be coaching D1 right now. It's just circumstantial that they're at a small little school. So I don't know, it just opened my eyes to how many just smart people are out there that study the game and know a lot and are willing to share that. And I think the willingness to share, I think, is the most important thing. Like that's what makes football is like the willingness to share insight.
You tweeted something the other day. You tweeted, I think I saw it in an Instagram story actually, but you said, I don't know who needs to hear this today. You need to punt less. What's the story there?
Yeah. So when I first got into coaching, I think you always think you know more than you do when you start out. I think there's kind of this early bias where, you learn a little bit, have a little bit of success. And you're like, I figured everything out. And so there have been a couple times in my coaching career where I've had a conversation with an older coach and they disagree with me on something. And I kind of go back to the drawing board and learn something through that conversation. And I actually, when I first got started out, had a conversation with Kevin Kelly, who's now the coach at Presbyterian College. He just got hired there, but he was at Pulaski Academy in Arkansas. And he's kind of world famous as the coach that never punts and always onside kicks. And honestly, like especially at the high school level, he had so much data backing up what he was doing. Like it wasn't a publicity stunt. Like he had studied the game and said, for what we're doing and the type of school we're at, it just works. We're not going to punt unless it's like dire straits. We're always going to onside kick and give ourselves a chance to get the ball back. And I was just kind of taken by that philosophy. And, for me, coming from that defensive perspective, I knew that it caused so much stress for me when I had a feeling that the offense was almost always going to use 4 downs. So when we would play these, and again, it's not necessarily what you think of like modern innovative spread offense, but when we would play these flexbone teams, we played a team called Lenore Rhine back when I was at Davidson, and Mike Houston was the head coach, who's actually now at East Carolina, and they're not running the flexbone anymore, but they ran it back at LR, and they would always go for it on 4th down because they're a flexbone team, and they would use 4 downs to get first downs, and it would just wear on you defensively. And not just physically, but mentally, because you had to be engaged for 4 downs. And so I was just like, I want to put that stress on the defense. So if we're kind of on the plus side of our own 40-yard line, like consider it 4 down territory, and we're going to be aggressive. And it was not only kind of from Kevin Kelly and kind of my own experience, but then also instilling that kind of sense of urgency in our players that like we are not trying to give the ball away. We're trying to attack. And I think the teams that I coached at St. David's, I think were really kind of passionate about that. Like they would be shocked if I sent the punt team out. They're like, are you serious? Even on like 4th and 12, they're like, what? So, it was one of those things where I'm not totally against punting by any means, but I think just football's more fun when it's being played aggressively and being coached aggressively and played aggressively. And I think the players have a lot of fun with it too. So that's kind of where that came from. It's kind of tongue in cheek, but I really do believe it. I think you should keep the punt team off the field as much as possible.
It reminds me of the NBA player who used to shoot free throws underhanded and made like every single one every time. And it's like he'll argue like it's against human nature, but it works better. Like statistically, it's backed up that it's more successful.
No, I mean, I just think, to your point, why aren't guys that are really struggling at the line just trying it? Like, what do you have to lose if you're shooting 30% from the line or 40% from the line? What do you have to lose? And I think more football coaches at lower levels kind of take that "what do I have to lose" mentality. And I think the higher you get when you're coaching, Power 5 or NFL, you're de-incentivized to take those risks because, if you go for it on fourth down and don't get it, you have a whole fan base coming back on you, and that you could end up developing a reputation and getting fired. Whereas if you're a high school coach, obviously that'll happen some, but there's a little less of a spotlight on you. And so I think in some ways, especially I think particularly in the NFL, there's kind of this self-preservation and you're never going to get fired for doing what everybody else is doing. I mean, not that you never will, but you're less likely to get canned for doing what everybody else is doing. And so I think there's a little bit of that self-protection at higher levels, but I just think people need to push the boundaries more, and I think it's better for the game. And that's why I really do believe what Andy Reid says, where he says like all the good stuff is trickling up. Like it's not like high schools aren't taking NFL stuff necessarily. I mean, obviously there's some phenomenal stuff happening at the professional level, but that's one of the things Andy Reid says is that a lot of the innovation in the game comes from the high school level, gets to the college level, and then it's tested and proven by the time the NFL adopts it.
Well, look at Gus Malzahn. He started coaching in in Arkansas, where he took a bunch of risks. And so I agree with you. What you're saying is high school football and lower levels allow you to take more risks, where if you're, Doug Peterson got run out of Philadelphia by the fan base. And if Urban Meyer drafts Zach Wilson instead of Trevor Lawrence and then fails, the fan base is going to come down way harder.
For sure.
I'm curious because there was one thing you have to answer to in high school football, which is parents. How do you? Because I've seen those parents. I played high school football. I played college football. Even in lower levels of college football, there are parents who are really aggressive. And how do you manage those relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the first and foremost, a lot of parent-coach relationships, the foundation of that is ultimately the relationship that you have with the player. And I think, a lot can happen between a parent and a coach, but ultimately if a player feels like you have their best interest in mind, I think that softens that relationship with parents. And so there's always going to be concerns about playing time and all these different things. But I think ultimately the approach that I've taken is I am always trying to put players in the best position to succeed. Whatever that looks like. Like there have been kids that have played for me that weren't necessarily particularly talented. But one of the things that I think separates football from maybe a lot of other sports is that you can still have a meaningful experience on a football team, even if you're not getting the ball 20 times a game. Because there's opportunities for camaraderie. And one of the things that we kind of lay as a foundation in our program and every team that I coached is the idea of human performance kind of being the baseline of like everything we do. And so you will be guaranteed to improve personally as an athlete. So you're going to get better in the weight room and you're going to get faster. We're going to push you in all facets of life. And so maybe you don't see quite the production on the field that you hoped for, but you're going to walk away from that experience hopefully being a better person and being a better player. And so I think that's one of the ways to kind of handle those things. There's always going to be someone that's not happy with what you're doing. I mean, that's just part of human nature, I think. But I think if you kind of set that foundation of like, I am to the best of my ability trying to do what's best for each individual player and trying to develop a relationship with that player, I think that's what leads to a lot of successful coaching runs.
Yeah, when you're coaching in high school, how do you define success? Because there's so much more than beyond winning and losing. Is because if you're Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, you have to win, and that's the number one part of your job. But there is more when you're coaching at a different level. What's your philosophy there?
Yeah, I mean, I think each team is so unique, and so I think more than anything, particularly as a high school coach, because there's always going to be those years that you have crazy talent and you could kind of call whatever you want and you're going to be successful. And there's other years where you may do your best coaching job ever and run a 500 record. And so I think for us as coaching staffs, every time we would talk about this, we would kind of say, what does it look like for us to achieve our potential and maybe even surpass our potential to a degree with this football team? And it really kind of it bleeds into every aspect of what you're doing. It's not just what you're doing on the field. It's also, how do we reach our potential in each of these areas? And, I think that's kind of an honest conversation that a coaching staff has to have each year of what does it look like to reach our potential. So for example, I've had teams that were really deep. We had a lot of kids. We could run tempo offense. We could score a lot of points, have a lot of fun. And I've had other teams that were a little leaner where we had less players and less depth, and we were playing, both ways and stuff like that. And so from a schematic perspective, it changes what you do. So you can't always, kind of try and ram that square peg in a round hole. You have to say what works for this team to achieve their potential. And so a lot of work goes in on the back end of saying, from a schematic perspective, what's going to help this team achieve their potential. From a human performance and training perspective, what's it going to look like? Do we need to do more or less conditioning, more or less speed training, more or less weightlifting? Like, do we have to practice more? Do we have to practice less? Like, you're taking into account all of those things, and ultimately, this is I think the biggest thing that allowed for like any amount of success I had as a coach was the promise I made the athletes was that I would never waste their time. And so we practiced shorter than maybe any team in the country, because I said, if you commit to putting everything you have into this 90-minute practice, you're done. You go home. It's it. And the amount of focus we had was increased because we weren't keeping them on the field for 3 hours, and we weren't, laboring in some of the ways that I think a lot of programs labor. And so I think it's interesting. Like, there were teams that, we said, we're never going to waste your time. And then they come to me saying, Coach, I think we need to work on this a little bit more. I think, I want to have a lunch with the offensive line to go through some film stuff. And when they started wanting to do extra, that's when I knew I had a team that was going to really rise to the occasion. And I think whenever, as coaches, I think a lot of times we try to almost mandate, like, you need to do extra, you need to do more on top of all the more and extra we're already doing. And when you can get a team to say, of their own will and accord, we want more, that's when you have a team that I think is gonna really be successful. And successful may not look like winning a state championship. It may look like achieving their potential. But I think to get that buy-in, it was promising, especially this generation, never going to waste your time. Because I value you as a person, and I value other interests you may have. And so in order for you to be a part of this team, I want you to be fully here when you're here, and then enjoy life when you're not.
I love the philosophy of we're gonna do less, but it's gonna be amazing, really good reps every time. Yes. We're fully focused. Less is more quality over quantity.
Correct. My wife's a graphic designer, and so I've learned a lot, just kind of life philosophy stuff from her. And she obviously, like, minimalism is kind of a word that gets thrown around the design community in terms of, like, not being overbearing with a logo or something like that. But really, the idea of less but better is something that, like, I really took to heart. And one of the pieces of advice I always give to coaches that are kind of starting out as offensive coordinators or something like that, I always say, install less than you think you need and rep it more than you think you need to. And I think that's just a good philosophy to have. Like, as coaches, we always want to do more. We're always going to have this desire to do more. And I had a really interesting conversation with Phil Longo, the offensive coordinator at North Carolina. And he said, I have my coach's playbook, which is about 1,000 pages, and my player's playbook, which is about, 200 or 150 pages. And so, like, as coaches, we're always going to have a deep reservoir of stuff we like. But for that particular team, what do they need? And how can I deliver it in a way that works for them? So I love the idea of a coach's playbook versus a player's playbook. And if you can pare down and get the most meaningful stuff in there, I think that's when you're going to have a team that really gets it and is able to execute.
I remember in my high school days, we eventually added more, but for like the first 4 weeks, we'd run outside zone and inside zone, and that's it. Because the offensive line's got enough to think about, learning where to go, what to do, all your steps. And once you master that, then you can graduate on to the next level of stuff.
For sure.
I look back. I had such a good group of high school coaches, man. I think I had like a college level staff coaching me in high school. Did you have any other advice for young coaches, man, that I always will never forget what you said just now, and I've heard you say it before, that install less than you think and rep it more than you think. But is there anything else you would say to young coaches?
Man, I think there's a lot of pressure on young coaches to learn a lot fast. And I would just say, like, be patient with yourself, because what you want is not necessarily just to like stuff all this knowledge in your head so that you know everything. I think more than anything, you want that knowledge to get like into the deeper part of your brain where it becomes like second nature. And so like take the slow approach to learning the game. Take your time, because I think the coaches that feel like they have to master something in a couple weeks, those are the coaches that they don't really have answers and can't think creatively. They're trying to like basically memorize the answers to the test and regurgitate the answers to the test. And I think the best coaches are the ones that maintain the creativity and the problem-solving nature of coaching. And I always tell people, like, coaching is problem-solving for your athletes. Like, that's what it is. And so if you're having an issue, don't always go to the manual and say, all right, well, now that we installed Mike Leach's offense, like, what does Mike Leach do here? It's like, well, you may need to get creative with the particular player you have as a slot receiver. How are they going to make sure they get the timing down on this route? And trying to understand those things and problem solve for your athletes, I think is so crucial. So that's a big piece of advice I have, is like take the slow approach to learning the game, because the deeper that knowledge embeds in you, the more creative you can be, and the more you're able to see the game and solve problems for your athletes, instead of saying like, okay, they're in cover 3 and here's a cover 3 beater and this is always going to work. Like, theoretically on paper, yes, but like it may not work with the players you have. Like, you may not have the arm strength to get that throw to the field. And so there's things like that where you just have to think about, like, how can I make the game work for my players? Like, that's the goal of a coach. It's not the theory, it's the practice.
Do you have a favorite coach or a couple favorites? You look around and go, like, that guy, I love watching him, I love his style.
Oh man, that's a great question, because there's so many guys that I admire, and you know, I think it's hard not to. You obviously have biases toward coaches that maybe you observe the most or spend the most time around, and I mean, of course, everybody loves Andy Reid, everybody loves Lincoln Riley. Like, I don't know those guys personally necessarily, but there have been some coaches that I've interacted with and just been really impressed with not only the way they run their offense, but the way they run their program. And it actually, to be honest with you, one of the head coach at my alma mater right now, Davidson College, a guy named Scott Abel, is just a coach I really admire. I think I'm fortunate enough to, my brother actually worked for the program for a bit, so I kind of got a behind the scenes look at kind of what he's about. He runs a spread triple option, and I think he's a problem solver. Like, he really gets that part of things, and I think he really he understands his identity, his program's identity, and kind of what works for everybody. And I think he does a phenomenal job. And it's been cool to see, because when I played there, we really struggled. I mean, I think my senior year we even had an 0-11 season, and then this past year they won the conference. And you know, it's just cool to see like the potential of a place be realized. And so that's certainly a guy I admire. I think there's so many others that I could talk to you about that I've, you know, gotten a chance to sit down with. And it's funny when it comes to coaches, like, yes, there are these big names that impress you and you see them on TV a lot, but there's just some really, really good high school coaches that know the game really well. And the only reason they're not coaching Power 5 right now is because they have a situation that works really well for their family and they're going to stay put. And so I think, I don't know, it's just crazy that the way the football world works, there's guys that really know the game at so many different places. And those are the guys that I think are most fun to connect with.
What do you make of Bruce Arians? He's got that philosophy, you know, if you miss your kid's recital or if you're missing family time, like, I'll fire. Like, he's outspoken about, hey, I want, like, he's kind of tongue in cheek, but he wants you to invest in your family too.
Yeah.
What do you make of that at the end? I've never seen that at the NFL level.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's probably evident that the coaches that have philosophies kind of similar to that, you rarely see people leave their staff. And I just think it's a really underrated aspect of football, is like the ability to keep a staff together is super hard to do, because if you have any level of success, guys are getting interviews and guys are getting job offers, and it's really hard to keep people in place. And so I always, one of my mentors always says this. He says, if you ever get to a place where you're running an organization or running a company, like, you got to remember that compensation is not always monetary. That quality of life is a way that you compensate your people. And so, one of the things that he always talks about is like, one of the ways that you can show appreciation for people is you could certainly give them a raise, but you could also give them a week off, or, find other ways to show your appreciation to them that maybe are not necessarily financially tied. And I think the best coaches find ways to do that. And I know, there are some great coaches that I've talked to that they're like, look, in the off season, like, I trust you to get your stuff done. Like, if you're not, and this is something Pat Fitzgerald talked about a lot. He's like, I'm not here to babysit you. Like, if you need to get stuff done, go get it done. Like, you don't have to ask permission. Like, if you can't do the job that I hired you to do, then we got a problem. But in terms of like me checking in on you and you guarding the desk and all these things, like, you're an adult. And so it's just interesting because I think there's a lot of coaches as football's kind of shifting, making almost like a generational shift. You're seeing coaching staffs that can stay together and coaching staffs that can't stay together. And that's just really interesting to me. And I think the quality of life aspect of it has a huge effect. And I think if you can find a coach to work with like that, I think you see those guys stick around for a long, long time.
Do you think the allure of playing or of coaching a guy like Patrick Mahomes? I mean, I know you talked to Mike Kafka, and I look at Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator there, and I go, dude, I don't know that Philadelphia job is really better than working with Patrick Mahomes and winning Super Bowls. Like, do you think he's a real effective draw?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing with the NFL that's probably a little bit different than some other levels of football is a lot of times what'll happen is a coordinator will get a head coaching opportunity, and if it doesn't work out, they're going to be back as a coordinator. Like, there's a lot of crossover. Like, if you're in the NFL world, like you can stay in, maybe, I guess, if that's the way to say it. And so I think there are some coaches that want that head coaching opportunity really badly, and the reality is, and this is high school, college, or professional, if the organization is not aligned with a particular vision, it has no chance for success. So you may have a great plan, but if there's no organizational alignment, it's not going to work. And that's just to have a chance at success, because you have a bunch of organizations that are aligned that you're competing with. And so I think you see some of the more dysfunctional programs, both at the college and professional level, that it doesn't matter who they hire as the head coach. If they're not going to get on board with that vision, no one's going to have success. And so I think, a coach like an Eric Bieniemy or a Mike Kafka can sit back and say, I'm in a really great organization, working for a really great head coach. I'm able to provide for my family, and it's going to take a lot for me to be in another opportunity. And I know, those guys are certainly deserving of their shot, but I think patience is probably a virtue in this sense that, you get one, maybe two shots to be a head coach. And do you want to waste that shot on an organization that's not aligned?
Yeah. You're wearing a Houston Astros hat, and I'm the strong opinion sports guy. I don't want to I don't want to put you on a pedestal, but do you think
No.
Do you think that Texas is one of those places, one of those jobs? Houston meeting, it's a Texas hat, basically.
For sure. Do
you think University of Texas is one of those jobs? It doesn't matter who they hire. There might be some toxicity in the culture behind the scenes.
Man, I don't really know enough about what's going on. What I do know is that Mac Brown is a phenomenal leader. I got a chance to spend a little bit of time over at UNC, obviously talking to Coach Longo, but sitting in at practice. And I don't know how old this guy is, but he has just a presence about him. And I think he earns the respect of every single person in the room. And, I think sometimes you can be a little bit of a victim of your own success in the fact that Mac Brown, I think, did such a phenomenal job at Texas that he maybe created an expectation that was maybe a little bit unrealistic, especially with the competition with recruiting down in Texas. And he had so much success that, and let's just be real about it. Like, I think that Texas team with Colt McCoy, if he doesn't get hurt, we may be talking about a different dynasty. It's one of those things where a play here or there, a shovel pass that gets picked off, like, it's the difference in the trajectory of two different programs. And so, again, I think here's the thing, you can get it right. But like, how many Mac Browns are there? How many Matt Campbells are there that can instill that sense of we're all rowing in the same direction? And I think those particular personalities are hard to come by. I don't know. I don't know what the back end of an organization looks like, but I think I don't know. There are some leaders that can really inspire everybody going in the same direction, and I think you kind of need that figure to be successful at a major college football environment.
Yeah, I know someone who actually, it's funny, not in the football world, who's I guess in the school side, professor or dean,
Sure.
ran a program kind of thing, and they were at UNC for a long time, and the people they still know at UNC speak so highly of Mac Brown, like they love him.
Oh, yeah.
Very much. And I know that last I checked, you were in North Carolina, still living there.
Yes, still in Raleigh, yes.
Do you have an opinion on Matt Rule? Because I love Matt Rule. I really,
Totally.
From what I've seen, I liked him at Temple. I liked how he rebuilt things at Baylor. What's your opinion on Matt Rule?
I mean, Matt Rule's a phenomenal football coach. And I think, it's interesting. I have a little bit of a background so I went to divinity school, thought I might be a pastor at one point, and really felt like football is kind of more my calling. And Matt Rule kind of has that pastoral, preacherly kind of quality where he can get up there and he can really move people in the way that he casts his vision, in the way that he kind of inspires people and gets people on board. And so I think he certainly has an opportunity to be very successful in the long run. And I know I would imagine for a while with some of his NFL ties, like he's been wanting this opportunity. And it's hard to imagine someone doing a better coaching job than what he did at Baylor, particularly what they were able to do defensively. And so, I think he certainly has everything in place to be successful. But here's the thing, in the NFL, like, the margin of error is so slim. And a lot of times, like, okay, yes, Andy Reid is an absolute genius and one of the best coaches of all time, but it really helps to have Patrick Mahomes. Whereas you may win your division and go to the AFC Championship with another quarterback, but he maybe vaults you into that premier level. And so I think Carolina's kind of probably at a point of trying to figure out like what that quarterback position looks like, and trying to find, again, there's so many good quarterbacks out there, but it's not enough to just be a good quarterback. Like there has to be some sort of elite quality, because I think it's really hard. Like there's such a small margin between like separating these teams. And so some of it is luck of the draw, man. I think if you can find the right guys, and stay injury free, and have a couple breaks your way, I think you can. That's the difference between 7-9 and 11-5. There's really not that big of a difference between 7-9 and 11-5.
Yeah, Derek Carr said they were like 4 plays away from making the playoffs. The Raiders were last year. I mean, it's crazy how small football is, and I'm not a religious guy, but I look at Matt Rule and I find him to be one of the most genuine guys. Like I don't know if he's a good coach. I mean, I would think based on what he's done in college, he's pretty dang good.
Yes,
but he might fail in the NFL, wins and losses wise. But as a person, I'm like, that's a dude I'd want to work for. I'd want to play for. In fact, a buddy of mine I played high school football with is their long snapper now, Thomas Fletcher.
No way.
From Alabama.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's right.
And
that's right.
they really, it's just that like whole from owner to coach to the way they treat people in that building. I look at Panthers and go, that's a place I'd want to be more than any other place in the NFL.
For sure. Yeah, and it seems like, especially from an owner's perspective, David Tepper's really committed to creating a really successful organization, and he's pouring resources into it too. I mean, that sounds kind of silly coming from a professional team, but there are some owners that pour resources in and some that don't. Some
are real cheap, man. Like
yeah. I mean, believe it or not, there's even at that level, there's guys and gals that are willing to give more or give less. And so I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I think, I think he's a really good coach, and I think he's got a great staff put together. But it'll be interesting to see kind of how everything shakes out, because it's so tough to win in the NFL. It's so tough.
I have like 3 more questions. Are you okay on time? I don't want to. I know it's gone 38 minutes.
I'm
okay.
Great. I'm great.
Awesome. I'm curious because you wrote a book, and I would, and no matter what, I was not going to let you walk without asking about this. I guess you wrote 2 of them now, and I'm curious about that process, because that is so daunting to me. The thought of putting together this whole collection of all kinds of stuff. Talk to me about writing a book. That process.
Man, it was honestly a very transformative process for me. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. I've always kind of been a writer, I guess, like more short form stuff. But I just really enjoy it, and football is obviously something I'm very interested in. And so I decided that I wanted to write a book, and the process for me was overcoming kind of that like self narrative I had of like, I'm a procrastinator, I never finish things, like I'm ADD, I'm all over the place, like how could I ever write a book? And so what I really did is I'm a big fan of Jim Collins and kind of the flywheel and good to great and different things like that. And one of the things that he talks about is like finding what, like almost going with the grain of your personality. And so for me, like something that really excites me is like discovery. And so when I'm discovering new plays, like I could write all about it, but then you talk to me 3 or 4 days later and I'm like, that doesn't really excite me.
Move on.
Move on. And so trying to capture that excitement was big for me. And so, what I ended up deciding to do with my books was I would basically write, I would break my book down into these bite-sized chunks. And so I would try to find 60 to 70 case studies of plays that I thought were really interesting in a particular field, and just find 60 or 70 plays that really excited me that I felt like I could write all day about. And as I would try to capture that excitement and write. And then I would organize those plays into modules. And so I would kind of group them together based on like similarities. And then I would, kind of tie it all together. And what I found is like I learned a lot in writing. Like as I was writing, I would discover things that I'm like, that's the same as that, and find these similarities. And so it's not necessarily me sitting down to a blank page and writing start to finish. It's like, it's a mosaic, where I'm like finding different pieces and putting them here and there. And so that really worked for me. I feel like it was kind of my flywheel. Like it just, once I got it going, it was like an unstoppable force, and ended up writing 2 books in a year. They were, it was daunting because it's a ton of writing. I think the counter book is probably like 170 pages on counter, and then the screen book's like close to 200 pages on screen. So it's like ridiculous.
You're a nerd, dude.
Yeah, honestly. But it was so fun. Like I just had a blast. And so another thing Jim Collins says is he's like, if it's not fun, stop doing it. And that was really like meaningful to me, because I was like, yes, I have to get this done, but like if it's not fun, I'm not going to do it. And so I just made it fun for me. And I'm like, if coaches get something out of this, great. And I feel like so many coaches they've been really kind in reaching out and, feeling like they can add things to their program through what I've written. And that means a lot to me. But more than anything, it was a process driven thing where it was like, I had fun in the process. I felt like I was able to walk away with almost like an anthology for myself that I can go back to and reference back to throughout my coaching career. And in the process, if I get to help some other coaches out, that's great. So it was fun, man. I definitely plan to write more. I may need to slow down the rate a little bit, but I think I've found kind of a rhythm that really works for me. And honestly, when I hit publish on that first book, I jokingly said to my wife, I was like, I feel like it changed my DNA. Like it was one of those things where like I no longer identify as like lazy procrastinator who can't finish anything. Like, I mean, believe it or not, like we all have these like self-talk things that kind of run in the back of our minds. And I felt like this was like a step in overcoming that kind of fallacy I had about myself.
You would not know this, but my dad's written multiple books.
Wow.
And I've seen that process behind the scenes, and I know it's just something you whittle away at over time. And I write every day, and I write for my show, and it's more it's almost like journaling for me, where I have to start and I'll be like, today I don't want to write at all, and then I'm like, but I have to. So like, you know, and then the more as I go, eventually good stuff comes out. I just once I get started, I can get going. Are you the same way?
Without a doubt, I'm the exact same way. Yeah, you write to write. You know, it's like you have to ease your way into it. And a fun little trick here that gets me unstuck is I write on Mac. I don't know if you're a Mac person or not, but there's a little function on a Mac where you can open up a document, and I think if you hit Control twice, it opens up like a dictation tab, and you can just dictate, and it captures all the words and like writes it down. And it's not perfect. There's probably other software that's better for you, but a lot of times if I get stuck, I just pretend I'm presenting at a clinic. And I'll just hit that dictation tab and start talking. And then I'll try to like clean it up in less colloquial. But it just helps get me unstuck. When I'm feeling stuck, I just kind of talk it out and try and get something on the page verbally. And, you just find these little tricks that work for you over time. And I think the biggest thing is like not allowing yourself to just stall out, get discouraged, and put the project down. Just say like, I'm going to keep plowing through this. And if I'm not interested, I'm going to go work on something else. And that's the nice part of not feeling like it's this linear project. It's like, you know what? Play action slip screens like aren't that interesting to me right now. So I'm going to go write about pass screen options for a bit. And I get to go work on something I'm interested in. And then I can come back when I'm feeling a jolt of inspiration.
Yeah, it's funny. In the content creation world, people think that, like, if I only made content when I was inspired, I would almost never make content. Like It's a choice to opt in. Because there are days where like, oh my gosh, it flows off the page. I have so much to say, and I'm so excited. And then there are days where I'm like, I got to put myself into that mindset, because it is a choice. It's easier than others, but some days you just got to get going and get started.
Yeah. Yep. Showing up every day is highly underrated.
Oh, for sure. And I got two things left, if I may. Number one is this, and I want to talk about the idea of a quarterback controversy. I'm curious how you would handle it if you had two guys who are very, very similar. They're both very similarly effective. What beyond their play on the field, or I guess what are your deciding factors beyond just they're very similar, would help you decide a starting quarterback?
This is a good question, because I think it very much, honestly, very much depends on how we're operating offensively. So there have been years where I've been tempo, no huddle, like we play incredibly fast pace. And I think in that type of offense, you're looking for a level of decisiveness and kind of swagger, and not a kid that's not necessarily going to second guess himself. You want somebody that's gonna go make plays and not make apologies. But if you're operating at a little slower pace and you're in the huddle a lot more, then that player is becoming much more of like a visual and auditory center for your team. And so that your team is literally looking at this player as he or she is calling plays. Like that's really important, right? Like you need to make sure that person can command a team. And so, again, it's tough to say, because I think it very much depends on the type of offense you're running and the style that you play with, and your style as a coach even too. I mean, I've had players that have kind of been a little bit more gunslinger, and I hate it, but I love it. It's one of those things where it's like, it frustrates me, but I've also kind of encouraged them to be that. And so making sure that I balance that out. But I think it has a lot to do with their ability to really instill confidence in their teammates. Are they able to make other people around them better? And that's not just from an on the field standpoint. Is there a willingness to get on the same page with the receiver about a particular route before or after practice? Is there a conversation with the center happening, or is it just like him yelling at the center for making a bad snap? Those types of interactions I think are really important. And the more that a quarterback demonstrates an ability to inspire their teammates and make them better in one way or another, that's probably the player you end up going with ultimately.
Do you ever, I guess I'm curious, is there a moment where maybe it's more about how he makes you feel? Like you're like, hey, I just have confidence in this guy. No matter how he works with the other player, with his teammates, there are times where you're like, hey, this is the guy I trust more.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge part of that from a coaching standpoint of, it's kind of a cliche, but the quarterback does end up being a bit of the quarterback ends up being a bit of an extension of you on the field. And so one of the things that I've tried to do over the years is take a little bit more of a rugby approach to coaching football. And so in rugby, the coaches are up in the booth like during the game. There's nobody on the field. And so they can offer very limited advice or insight throughout the course of a game, obviously halftime and other things like that. But I've tried to be more and more hands-off even during the game and give more autonomy to the players. And so there is an element of trust of, I don't just want you to know the plays. I want you to know a lot of the why behind, okay, why do we do this? Like when we get in the red zone, why does coach have me running more when we're in the red zone than when we're in the middle of the field? Well, it's because we can get +1 in the run game. That makes sense to me. Okay, if we're running tempo, I can call my own number, in these situations. And so again, there's like there's all these things that are going on, but for me to have confidence in a player, a lot of times it's seeing particularly at the quarterback position, somebody start to have confidence in themselves and they're identifying with some of the philosophy that we've established as a team.
That's a great answer. I got to say, man, you've done phenomenal today. I really
appreciate that.
I'm curious. Is there anything you think I should have asked you that I haven't asked you about? Is there any thing you're like, there's something out there? I'm like, he should have asked this, Zach.
That's a good question.
It's okay to be no.
Yeah, you've covered the bases, man. I think we've hit on some good stuff for sure.
Can I ask you a non-football question?
Of course, always.
So I got engaged in February.
Yes.
Wedding date is July
Congrats.
16th, 2022. Thank you. And
Amazing.
I love
That's
your
awesome.
posts as a dad and as a husband.
Yeah.
I go like, man, you look like you're doing great. It's Instagram, but I'm like, I'd still like, it looks impressive. And I'm curious if you have any advice just as a dad and as a father.
Yeah, man, that's a great question. That's obviously I love football, but it pales in comparison to my family. I have an amazing wife, Grace, that has helped me with so many things in my life, both from professional and personal standpoint, and two amazing kids, Zion and Ada, that they're both adopted and kind of the best thing we have going in life right now, and we're super fortunate. 2 and 1 year old. And I think the biggest thing, I guess, piece of advice I can offer is like, you're never going to regret making decisions that have the best interests of your wife and your kids in mind. Like, I just think in life, making the sacrifice of family for other reasons is like, it's really never worth the trade-off. Like I always kind of take the opinion, like if I'm putting my family first, like the rest will take care of itself. And so that's one thing. And then also, I guess maybe like more specifically from a parenting perspective, this is a lesson I learned the past couple of years, is that, time is like, quality time is obviously, something everybody talks about as being really important as a parent. And I think I really stress like the quality of that time. And so for me, like, obviously there's so many thoughts going on in my head, and I'm working on these projects and getting up early in the morning and coaching and doing all these different things. But for me, like, there's something about like being able to like ground yourself in your body, in your time that you have with your kids. And like, for me, it literally means like sitting down on the floor with my kids and playing with them. And it sounds really simple, but like, I think there's like something to like embodying that experience and not letting yourself drift off, because it's so easy, even when you're around your kids, to like jump on your phone and do all these different things. And I think what I've realized is like those bonds and connections have grown so much from literally just like sitting on the floor with them for 20 or 30 minutes and playing with them, and getting on their eye level. Like, I think that's a really big thing for a parent, is like to literally be on eye level with your kids. And I think about that in a more like abstract sense with my players. Like, what does it look like for me to get on eye level with my players, and try to understand their experience and not just come at it from kind of my ivory tower. So, I think that's huge. And I think, one of the things that I've learned most as a married man is that, what you really do is like, you end up in successful marriages, like you bring out the best in each other. And one of the things that I've found is like my wife has, in the time that I've grown with her, she has taught me a lot of things about myself that I didn't know were in there. Like I don't think I ever would have been able to write a book if I hadn't learned so many things from her. And you just realize that like through that relationship, you become the better version of yourself, and just being willing and open to that is a really cool part of life, because no one's static, no one's stuck with who they are. We're all evolving over the course of our lives, and the more you can evolve toward that other person, the better off you are.
I love, I work all the time. Like literally, it's my life. It's like I'm trying to go to bed at 10 now. I'm like, hey, no, if it's dark, go to bed, do it the next day. And I got a break now. It's not football season, thank goodness. There's nothing I'm trying to beat out right now.
Right.
But my fiance and I had this really good conversation. He's like, look, you work all the time, but when you're present, be present. Like, don't be on your phone. Yeah. Like, don't be. Totally. You're off in another world still. Like, if you're ever gonna hang out with me, like, be here. Totally. And I really need to hear that. And then with kids, I'm afraid of having kids right now, as far as like I'm building a business. I mean, it's a lot.
Totally.
And it's encouraging to hear you say that you'll never regret prioritizing them, because I know at some point when I have kids, it's going to be something I have to make a shift at work a little bit. And it's just, it's good to hear. Like that's something I needed to hear a lot. I'm like, God, okay, that's awesome.
I think, there's no, I think one of the things that I would do early on is I would like postpone joy. I was like, I'll be happy when X, Y, or Z happens. And then I would achieve these things. And then I was like, oh man, I actually don't feel much different. And so one of the things that like the shifts that we've tried to make in our life is like capturing joy, like right there where it is. Like if I'm enjoying, time with my kids, I'm going to like enjoy that moment, and I'm not going to like postpone it and say like, oh, when I have more time, or when there's always these like caveats we put on things. And so trying not to postpone those things, but like really being present in the moment and enjoying the things that life has to offer us right now, I think is highly valuable. One of the things that I always talk to my team about is, the more you can ground yourself in the present, the happier you're going to be in your life. Like if you get stuck in the past and the future a lot, like you're always going to be consumed with anxiety, and there's always going to be time to be anxious. And so the more you can find yourself in the present moment, which is what we try to create with our football program, is like just to be present as much as possible. And I think it's a relief for people to be present. It's like, it's really nice. It's a nice change up from our modern world.
Dude, it's been really hard. I've been moving. In 3 weeks, I'll be living in Hawaii full time.
Oh my goodness!
It's been it's been months and months of preparation. I'm
sure.
Like the cats are the hard. You'd never believe the cats are so hard to get on the island. And
I would imagine.
Yeah, I'm shipping my car. What's today? Thursday? Tomorrow, shipping my car off.
Wow.
And it's been the hardest thing to say. I'm in the Portland area. I'm like, no, it's still beautiful here. It's still green. I got to enjoy my walks. Like, because I keep wanting to look ahead. I'm like, no, you'll get there.
For sure.
Enjoy now. And that's been so difficult.
Totally. No, it's a very hard lesson to learn, but I think I'm a little bit like, I definitely studied some philosophy in college and different things like that. And I've, we try to do a lot of like meditation, breath work, different things like that. And I really struggle to stay in the present moment, but it's something I'm really working at. And it just makes life better, man. It really does. Like if you're able to do it, it really does help a lot.
Man, Dan, this has been so much fun. We went an hour basically.
That was great, man. I loved it.
Me too. You're a great dude. It's fun to follow you. I'm a big fan of you. So just thank you so much for your time. I really truly appreciate it.
For sure, man. I really appreciate it. Keep up the good work, man. I'm excited to keep following along as you get down to Hawaii, and man, that's gonna be sweet.
Yeah, man, it's gonna be awesome.
Your time frame for like studying these games is probably gonna be all wacky, right? With the time
I'm so glad. Monday Night Football is at 2:00, and I'm like,
that's great.
Praise the Lord! Like, how hard it is to do a game at like 8, and you have to try to then watch it, write about it, get it out the next day. I'm like, no. Brutal. Monday Night Football, 2:00 on Monday, get it out on Tuesday.
It's gonna be great.
I'm so happy. Yeah, man, I'm not gonna miss the time zone. Like it was either gonna be, I had to either be East Coast, so I'm happening as things happen, or I'd rather just be way behind. And I was like, on the West Coast, you're just in the middle, and it's no benefit. You're just kind of never on time or early. You're always late. And just kind of weird and
totally. That's awesome.
All right, man. Well, Dan, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Of course, man. Good to meet you, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch.
Absolutely.